Welcome to the Screw the System channel. I'm Joe Barnes and I'm back with another video focusing on the coronavirus outbreak, ensuing pandemic and everything around that subject. Now the reason I'm making this video now is that recently here in the UK we've gone into what's called a Tier 4 lockdown. So basically we're pretty much back in exactly the same lockdown that we had back in April and May earlier this year. Anyway, I wanted to focus on a really simple, easy to understand piece of information, a statistic that came out actually in November, so that's just over a month ago, and base my video around that and ask an important question. Should you trust your governments? Are you under an obligation to obey every single rule that the government decrees? Now, I made a video before on this subject back in September, and in that video, again, I focused on one very simple statistic and piece of information. I'm not really going to go into conspiracy theories. I'm not going to get overwhelmed by media hype about how serious the COVID-19 coronavirus pandemic is. Instead, I'm just going to focus on these really simple statistics and then ask you the question, ask you to make decisions about them and expand your thinking, apply some critical thinking to this situation, which is something I think is sorely lacking in this whole coronavirus crisis, is any kind of critical thinking. I want to talk about this new statistic that has come out in November in this country. It relates to the UK, but I'm sure it probably in a rough way with a few percentages, either plus or minus, is the same in other parts in the world. Basically, in November, the Times newspaper, the independent newspaper, and I'll leave links below so you can verify what I'm saying, released that the average death rate from coronavirus, the average death age from coronavirus, was something like 82.4 years old. Interestingly enough, in the UK, we have an 81 and a half years average life expectancy. This means that the average person who was dying from coronavirus was actually outliving the average life expectancy for people in this country. The elderly who are dying, essentially, not people who are young or even middle-aged. People who are healthy, children, are not dying from the coronavirus in vast swathes. And of course there are exceptions to this rule, but this is the rule. And if this is the rule, it holds some really interesting implications and points to consider, because it's clearly, the coronavirus is clearly not as deadly as the media is making out. Right now we're being told about the super mutant strain of the virus, which is rampaging around the country, is on the leash and causing much higher infection rates, and that's why we've had to go into this restrictive lockdown again. But clearly this mutant super strain is not so deadly that it's killing people in their 40s and 30s. You know, we're not having an average death age of coronavirus of 40 years old. It just simply isn't the case. No matter how much the media tries to hype up the coronavirus and COVID-19, we're not dealing with something like Ebola here. Ebola has an average death rate of 50%. That means half the people who get it are going to die. That's not the situation with coronavirus. And if that's not the situation with coronavirus, if it's killing people in the main who are already living beyond the average life expectancy in this country, then why are we having this tremendous lockdown? Why are we having such huge restriction on everybody's freedom, on everybody's life? Again, I just want to read you some interesting statistics here. Now, I've got these from the Twitter feed of a writer called James Melville, and his statistics, this is again, he tweeted this in November. He's written the collateral damage of lockdown. He says 3 million people self-employed since March with no income. 27 million GP appointments cancelled since March. Obviously March is when we had our first lockdown. 30,000 excess non-COVID deaths at home. So that's 30,000 people dying not because of COVID, but because they're isolated at home. 3 million delayed cancer screenings. Obviously that's going to have consequences. And a GDP drop 3 times worse than the 2008 2009 financial crisis, and that's something which is going to have consequences for years to come. What I want to highlight is that there's another side of the story. There are serious consequences to these lockdowns, and you've got to ask, are these lockdowns ultimately justifiable? Because I feel like we're getting to a point in our society where we're saying that risk is not tolerable. We can't live with risk. We can't have the risk that people might catch this COVID-19 virus, which, when you think about it, is probably going too far, because life is risk. And when you take away that element of risk, you take away life. And that's essentially what we're sort of heading towards at the moment, or we have been moving in that direction. We're taking away the opportunity for people to live their lives. All for a virus that only kills people. The average death from the virus is 82.5 years old, and the death rate from the virus is 0.6%. And we're taking away a lot of people's livelihoods, a lot of people's futures because of that. Now, the big question I asked at the start of this video is, should you obey your government? And my answer is no, not in all circumstances. And just because it's the rules doesn't make it right. And don't mistake an obedient person for a good person. They aren't the same thing. Sometimes you have to question your government. I don't think the government is acting in the people's best interest at the moment. I think they're acting in their interest. They're trying to cover their asses. They don't want a media shitstorm saying 100,000 COVID deaths. The government are responsible. Why aren't they locking down? Why aren't they doing this? They're scared of that. They want to be re-elected. So that's why they're enforcing these lockdowns. They don't really care about how many people die from COVID-19. They also don't want the NHS overrun. That's another factor, and an interesting and important factor as why we go into these lockdowns and why they might be important is because our health service can't handle it if we get an influx of too many ill people. However, haven't we had since the summer to prepare for this? Didn't we know that this virus is more rampant during the winter when all of our immune systems are a bit weaker? So shouldn't the government have made provisions already for the winter when there was going to be a spike in the number of infections? So that again is perhaps a fault of the government. Throughout history, you can also see examples of where governments can't be trusted. The Iraq War of 2003, weapons of mass destruction that didn't exist. If you're living in America, the Vietnam War. There was an incident in the Bay of Tonkin where the Americans sabotaged a ship and basically looked for an excuse to start war on the Vietnamese, all under this crazy idea that they had to suppress communism. Millions of deaths of Vietnamese people, hundreds of thousands of deaths of US troops. The war was a complete farce in a way and achieved nothing. Now, would it have been right then to have refused the draft, to have not obeyed your government? Absolutely. So the question is now, are you right for not obeying these lockdown rules? Well, the answer to that is obviously you don't want to be crazy. If you know somebody's got COVID-19 or coronavirus, then you're not going to associate with them. You're not going to spend time with them. Don't be irresponsible is what I'm trying to say. However, if you're really lonely, if you feel like your life is suffering and your mental health is deteriorating, perhaps your physical health as well, then by all means go and see a friend, go and socialize with somebody. If you're pretty certain you haven't got it and you're pretty certain they haven't got it, if you know that your health is okay, you're not in a vulnerable age category, and you're not then going to expose yourself, be exposed to somebody in a vulnerable age category, then do it. You're really not at any risk, or the risk that you're taking is negligible. And if you can't take risks in life, as I said earlier, you stop living a life. So I do really feel there are some situations where you should break the lockdown. As I said, don't be irresponsible, but just because the government says so, just because it's the rules, it doesn't mean you have to follow. And sometimes you're actually standing up for what's right and doing something good by breaking those rules, because in a sense you're saying, look, if we all stood up to the government and said, look, we're no longer going to abide by these rules, or we need to find another way, maybe we need some rules but this is too restrictive, it would have no choice but to comply. Ththese rules, our freedoms are only taken away from us with our permission. It's our fear which is meaning we're allowing ourselves to be controlled. And fear largely stoked up by the media. So anyway, I'm not going to go on much longer. I've made my point. Please, if you disagree with me, in the comment section below, leave your comments. If you agree with me, if you feel that there's something to add, please put that below. Please subscribe to the channel also. We're chasing 1,000 subscribers. I'm not too far off. The time of making this, I'm at about 930. So if you watch the channel somewhat regularly, even if you've only watched 2 videos of mine and you've taken some interest in what the channel is all about, please, now is the time to subscribe. Help me get to that 1,000 figure. Thanks again for watching. I will see you in the next video.